Hello, welcome to Concept T classes. In this session, we will study the second chapter of Class 8 Science, Microorganisms, Friend and Foe. The chapter will be completed in 2 videos. So let's start part 1. The entire chapter 2 basically contains 3 sections. The first one is what are microorganisms? Where do they live? Microorganisms and us. That is the effects of microorganisms on us. And this section is again divided into 2. Their good effects and the harmful effects of microorganisms. In this video of part 1, we will be covering the entire portion except for the harmful effects of microorganisms. Microorganisms. What are microorganisms? The living organisms that are around us, which are very small and cannot be seen with our naked eyes, are called as microorganisms. Why are they called as microorganisms? Because they are very small in size. These are some of the examples of microorganisms. And they are also called as microbes. They can be seen with the magnifying glass or a microscope. Now, microorganisms can be classified into 5 groups, namely bacteria, fungi, protozoa, algae and virus. Now, let's study each of these groups briefly. The first one is bacteria. Bacteria are single-celled organisms that exist in millions in all types of environment, both inside and outside of other organisms. Example, Bacillus. Bacillus is a bacteria that lives outside, that is in soil and water. And E. coli is a bacteria that lives inside the intestines of human. Now, some of the diseases caused by bacteria are typhoid and tuberculosis. Now, the second group of microorganisms are fungi. Fungi can be single-celled or multicellular organisms. They mostly live on land, mainly on soil or on plant rather than in water. Some of the examples of fungi are Aspergillus. Aspergillus are found both indoor and outdoor. Rhizopus. They are usually bread mold. If we keep a bread outside for more than 1 week, we can find grey or black patches on the top of the bread. This is usually a fungus called as Rhizopus. And the third one is Penicillium. A molecule of this penicillium is used as an antibiotic called as penicillin. And the diseases caused by fungi are aspergillosis and fungal infections. The next microorganism group is protozoa. Protozoa are single-celled organisms that live in a wide variety of moist habitats, including freshwater, marine environments and soil. Example is amoeba and paramecium. The diseases caused by protozoa are dysentery, which is diarrhea, and malaria as well. The fourth group of microorganisms is algae. Algae can be single-celled like Chlamydomonas or multicellular like Spirogyra. The algae live in fresh water or seawater. Some algae can grow on rocks, soil or vegetation as long as there is enough moisture. Algae requires moisture for its existence. Now, the fifth group of microorganisms is the virus. Viruses are the smallest of all the microbes. They are different because they can survive and reproduce only inside the cell of other host organisms. That is, viruses are different from all these 4 groups of organisms because these 4 groups of organisms can survive both inside and outside other organisms, but viruses can survive only inside the cells of other host organisms. Example of viruses are adenovirus. This virus causes fever, sore throat, diarrhea, pink eye, etc. And bacteriophage, it is a type of virus which is used as a substitute of antibiotic. So we have studied what are microorganisms and the classification of microorganisms. Now the next section is where do microorganisms live? There are microorganisms everywhere. from ice cold environment to very hot deserts. Microorganisms are also seen in marshy lands as well as animals. Microorganisms are also seen inside and outside of humans. So we saw what are microorganisms, where do they live. The next section is microorganisms and us. Microorganisms play a very important role in our lives. Some of them are beneficial in many ways, and some are harmful and cause diseases. That is, microorganisms can either be a friend to us or it can be an enemy or a foe to us. Now let's study each of these beneficial uses of microorganisms in this chapter. So the first one is making of curd and bread. Microorganisms can also be used commercially. Microorganisms can be used for medicinal purposes. Microorganisms increase the soil fertility and it also clean the environment. Now let's study each of these purposes in detail. Now let's first study how microorganisms help in making of curd and bread. Curd contains a bacteria called as lactobacillus. This is an image of the bacteria lactobacillus. This bacteria promotes the formation of curd. Have you seen how your mother makes curd? She takes a bowl of warm milk and puts a spoon of curd into it. And after 8 to 12 hours, if you take that bowl of milk, we can find that the whole milk is converted into curd. How is this possible? This is done with the help of lactobacillus. The lactobacillus, which is present inside the curd, multiplies in the milk and converts it into curd. Bacteria is also involved for making cheese, pickles and other food items like rava idli or bhatura. Bacteria and yeast are also helpful in the fermentation of rice, idli or dosha batter. This is an image of yeast. So what do you mean by the process of fermentation? Now let's take an example. If you take some flour, add some sugar and water into it along with a small pinch of microorganism called as yeast and knead it into a soft dough. After 2 hours we can find that this dough rises up. This is due to the process called as fermentation. Fermentation occurs in the absence of oxygen and in the presence of the microorganism called as yeast. These microorganisms called as yeast break down the sugar and starches into alcohol, and this process is called as fermentation. Fermentation is the process of breaking down sugar and starches into alcohol. So in this process, what happens is that the yeast reproduces very fastly and produces carbon dioxide during respiration. And because of this gas, bubbles form and it fills the dough and it increases the volume. That's why we use yeast in baking industries or for baking bread. Now secondly, let's study how microorganisms are used commercially. Microorganisms such as yeast are used in a large scale for the production of alcohol, wine and acetic acid. For this commercial purpose, microorganisms such as yeast is grown on natural sugars which are present in grains like barley, wheat, rice, crushed fruit juices. Then this yeast breaks down the sugar and convert it into alcohol, and this process of conversion is called as fermentation. Fermentation is the process of converting sugar into alcohol. The fermentation was discovered by Louis Pasteur in 1857. Now let's study the medicinal use of microorganisms. Can we use microorganisms as medicines? Yes, we can. When we are ill, the doctors prescribe us with some antibiotic tablets or injections like penicillin. The source of these tablets or injections are actually microorganisms. Now, what do you mean by antibiotics? The medicines which kill or stop the growth of disease-causing microorganisms are called as antibiotics. And these antibiotics nowadays are produced from bacteria and fungi. Example, streptomycin, tetracycline and erythromycin. Antibiotics are not effective against cold and flu. These are the diseases caused by viruses, and antibiotics are not effective to the diseases caused by viruses. Vaccine. Just like antibiotics, vaccines are also made from microorganisms to protect humans and animals against several diseases. Now, how does this vaccine work? When a disease-causing microbe enters into our body, the body produces antibodies to fight the invader. If the microbe enters again, the body remembers how to fight the microbe again. So, if a dead or a weakened or an inactive microbe is introduced into a healthy body, the body fights and kills the invading bacteria by producing suitable antibodies. And these antibodies remains in the body and protects the body from this disease causing microbes forever. And this is how vaccines work. Several diseases like polio, cholera, tuberculosis, smallpox and hepatitis can be prevented by vaccination. We already studied how microorganisms can be used commercially, the use of microorganisms in medicinal purposes. Now we'll see how microorganisms increases the soil fertility. Some microorganisms are able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. These microbes fill the soil with nitrogen and increases its fertility, and they're also called as nitrogen fixers. One such example is the bacteria called as rhizobium. This is a rhizobium which inhibits legume root nodule as their host. That is, the bacteria called as rhizobium, they use legume plants as the host and they reside in the root nodules. They use all the carbohydrates in exchange of the nitrogen. And then this bacteria, rhizobium, it converts the nitrogen that they have received from the atmosphere into compounds of nitrogen, which is then utilized by plants from the soil through roots. Now, other than rhizobium, there are other nitrogen fixers that exist without plant host, like blue-green algae, which is also called as cyanobacteria. They don't require any host. They have chlorophyll within themselves and they can make food by the process of photosynthesis. Now, the last purpose is how microorganisms can clean the environment. We often see a very large amount of dead organic matter on the ground like a pig, and after some time they gradually disappear. Why is that? These microorganisms consume on these dead organic matter. That is, they decompose this dead organic matter, converting them into simpler substances like salt, carbon dioxide, which are again then used by other plants and animals. Plants or animal waste are decomposed by microorganisms, thereby making it into manure. We have studied about manure in chapter 1, and this manure increases the soil fertility as well. Thus, these microorganisms degrade the harmful and smelly substances, thereby cleaning the environment. So we have come to an end of our video. So let's take a quick recap of what all we have studied today. First, we studied what are microorganisms. Microorganisms are the living organisms around us which we cannot see with our naked eye. Then we studied the classification of microorganisms. The first one was bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoa. The last was virus. Then we briefly discussed about all these groups and some of the examples as well as the diseases caused by these microorganisms. Then we studied where do these microorganisms live. Microorganisms are everywhere. From hot to cold regions, they live both inside as well as outside living organisms. Then we discussed how microorganisms affect human beings as a friend. So that's all for part 1. Tune in soon for the next session, Microorganisms, Friend and Foe part 2, where we'll discuss the harmful effects of microorganisms. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you find the contents useful. Thank you so much. May God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.